Welcome to the latest series of the FODcast, where we bring you the latest insights into the future of digital commerce. In Season 6, we continue to interview some of the most respected professionals in the industry as we broaden the topics to cover what it takes to build a business within e-commerce, navigating through business change, as well as the future of technology within digital commerce. As we continue our journey to have one of the best podcasts within commerce, we ask you to like and share within your network if you enjoy our content. Welcome back to episode 8 of the FODcast, and our very first episode in this series with two guests. Today, I'm joined by Abbie Ross and Kathryn Roberts, Senior and Principal Consultants for the business transformation consultancy, Leantree. Welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thank you.
No worries at all. Looking forward to this one. Today's show is focused on business change, another hot topic within digital transformation, and unfortunately, something I hear is far too often overlooked. Ever since Kathryn and Abbie agreed to join me on the show, I've been excited for this one, so let's jump straight in. So, business change. Why is it important then?
Well, I think it's vital to the success of a program because often it's not just about the technology delivery that's important. It's about the fact that people actually have to use the tools at the end of the day. And if they're not actually using what's been delivered or developed, then actually it means that the project will fail ultimately because they won't be able to reach their business benefits.
I see a bold claim on your website as well that the majority of digital transformations fail.
Yeah, in our experience, I think we've seen a number of digital transformations that fail, not because the technology hasn't been delivered or been, successfully delivered from a technology perspective, but actually the fact that the teams are then not using it or they're not actually immediately able to see the value from using those tools is why it tends to fail. The business can often choose not to use the new technology. So even if we spent millions on it and then no one actually ends up using it or doesn't end up getting any business value from it, then ultimately the project's not been a success.
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, it's something that I hear far too often. And I mean, there's various reasons as to why projects do fail. And I look forward to unlocking some of the insights that you share around what you've seen in the market over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. Yeah, let's start at the top then. So, business change. How many companies do you believe apportion the right amount of budget to business change?
What do you think, Abbie?
I think we would say, and from our experience, especially the transformations that we've been part of here at Leantree, is that often it is underfunded. I think the disconnect that we see is that a lot of business teams that are impacted by changes upcoming, whether they're digital transformations or otherwise, the business teams and the end users that are impacted aren't ready for the change. They don't understand what's coming their way. They don't understand the complexity. And we see a disconnect between, I guess, often the program team, especially in digital transformations, that are working hard to get the change in the program over the line. But we often hear that business users are not engaged. That there's there's that disconnect, but also the teams are struggling to understand each other, and therefore that causes worry. And that's often where we as a team are kind of brought in to work with clients on their transformations, and that's often, unfortunately, the kind of lay of the land that we approach and land into. So I would say definitely it's under considered.
Okay.
No.
And I'd be interested to know, actually, as we're at the start of this conversation, is how often do you get drafted into conversations at the start of a transformation program versus a transformation program that is either about to go wrong or has already started going wrong?
I think in our experience, we often come in sort of almost too late in the process. So we would say that we need to be in there at the point at which you're selecting your vendors or you're selecting your SI or you're starting the project. We often get brought in at different points, either because, to Abbie's point, there is a problem and they need some help, or at the point at which they are about to start thinking about things like training or trying to understand what the impact on the business users is. and they think, okay, hang on a second, we've got no one in the business who can actually support this, and so we're asked to be brought in. I think, as I say, we would advocate for going in as early as possible. But to your point at the beginning, that this is why it's often, I think, overlooked at the moment. It's not front of center of people's minds when they're starting out on a big transformation program to think, oh, hang on a second, we're going to need someone to help us actually think about the business impact here. The focus is very much on delivery of technology rather than on the overall success of the whole program. And often the interesting thing is the business benefits or the benefits of the technology implementation will often be business led. So there'll be things like we need to increase revenue, increase conversion, deliver operational efficiencies. But the element that they often don't consider in all of that is the people. So they're very focused on the technology, but not necessarily thinking about the people in that program.
Yeah, and until that's what I find crazy is you look at some of the organisations that you work with, but in general, sort of enterprise digital transformations, they're led by someone who's done this before. Generally, C-suite in these companies have a bit of experience. They've probably been through a transformation or two in the past, so they should be going into this with their eyes wide open, knowing, okay, this does require a hell of a lot of change across the business. And as someone that isn't directly involved in it, it amazes me that it's a process that is overlooked, because everything is changing, from the technologies that people work with, from the processes that happen, from just the way in which the business works. We're seeing project to product in terms of mindset and cultures in the business. There's so much change. For me, this is like the number one thing as to, cool, we're going through this change. Let's make sure we manage the change properly. I can't get my head around it.
I think, to be honest, it's still some of it's still related to where they see their overall goals. So if they are responsible for delivery, then that's going to be their focus rather than actually the overall success of the project. So if there's an aligned goals across the business, then you will see a bit more buy-in. I think also sometimes within a business, there's an initial ambition that business people who are best placed to get involved in this will be able to help support with this activity. And what they find is that, BAU activities often end up taking over. And therefore they don't have the time or capacity to give to these activities, and therefore that's when they come to us and say we need some help and support.
Okay, gotcha. So find like the savior, basically.
We like to think of ourselves like that, but yeah.
Superheroes, eh? So cool. I like it. Okay, so we just touched upon there sort of why it's important and why they should be investing in business change. We've also touched upon some of the consequences of not investing enough or potentially at the right time. So let's just skip back a notch and say, where do you start? So as a transformation consultancy yourself, you've already highlighted the fact that you would like to be drafted in right at the start of those conversations. How would you start that process?
So we initially start by understanding the nature of the change and what's involved in it. And we do a lot of discovery to make sure we fully understand all the teams impacted. So we do a lot of stakeholder identification and analysis to identify what the impact of this change will be on different stakeholder groups. And we start by also trying to build the relationships with the business so that they trust us to behave and act on their behalf. And we try to embed ourselves actively in the business so that we have the same mindset. We're clear on what their goals are. We're clear on what the goals of the technology program are as well. And that enables us to then sit between the sort of the technology teams and the business and to help facilitate the program as it goes along, because there are lots of different stages where we'll need to help provide support.
Okay. And how lengthy is that kind of process, right? How do you, when you go into an organization, how long does it really take you to find your feet and get settled?
It really depends on the size of the program, the complexity of it, the number of different teams involved. It depends on also what the goals are. Like if, for example, if we're going in because there is a problem, quite often we don't have very much time to do that. So we've learned ways in which we can speed up that sort of onboarding process. But also I think the other thing to add is that both Abbie and I and most of the change team at Lean Tree have come from working within industry. So we've got a huge amount of experience of sort of change and programs of change that have been done to us effectively where we haven't been actively involved. So we almost have this ability to be able to identify sort of things to watch out for, areas to make sure we're clear on, know where we've potentially seen problems before, know what potential stakeholder groups might be, their behaviours. We see some common patterns across different groups of people, particularly certain teams where we know that their engagement maybe won't be as involved as we would like, and other groups where maybe with engagement is naturally going to be higher because they've got a direct impact. So I think some of that comes from also experience of being sort of on the other side, as well as being involved in actually helping to facilitate the change.
Yeah, I actually noticed that. I was having a little browse over LinkedIn earlier on, and I saw that almost everybody has got a background in either retail or through a D2C brand. Is that part of the hiring process for Lean Tree? Is that like a mandatory requirement?
I think it's not necessarily mandatory, because I think people bring lots of different skills, but I think it's something where it actually has helped us build up our strength and helped us be successful, quite quickly, because we've actually got that experience. I mean, my experience of change is that I grew up in a customer service support environment, and I was the recipient of lots of different changes which weren't particularly well managed, that impacted how my team performed, how they dealt with customers. And I think I sort of felt that actually there was a much better way of doing things based on what I've learned. And I think that's sort of, Abbie's come through a similar background as well. And I think we therefore apply that learning. We've got some understanding of what the teams are going through, and therefore can try and help them and be empathetic because we've actually been in their position.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it certainly gives you a slight USP. It's not a common practice. You generally find a lot of consultancies have people that have a consulting career. So seeing it from the other side is definitely very useful, and you can almost see those challenges before they arise from a different perspective.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the value that we bring, is that we can start to spot where we've seen things happen before, or we know what to look out for. So as I say, it could be that particular stakeholder groups tend to have the same behaviours across different organisations, so we know to watch for them. Or we know that if someone stops coming to attending meetings, for example, it's the first sign of disengagement, and therefore we know we need to step in to try and make sure that they are engaged. And we've learned from experience as well. We've also at Lean Tree worked on a number of big digital transformations, and I think we've also learned more recently about the best way for us to be able to provide support to the teams to make sure that the business teams are going to be able to maximize the value of what technology is delivering. There's no point in technology teams delivering capability that then the business don't use, and that's quite often their way of showing dissatisfaction. They just turn around and don't use the tools, and then it's a lot of money wasted. So we're trying to make sure that when they do finally start using the tools, they know what they're doing, they know how to use it, we've agreed the processes, they know who's responsible and who's accountable for these tools.
You hear that a lot, right? Business versus IT, and pointing the finger at each other to say it's their fault. No, it's their fault. We wanted this and they wanted that. And I think a lot of it stems down to communication at all levels, whether it be from the top, whether it be from internal employees, whether it be from the third parties, etc.
Agree.
I think change is obviously dependent on people at the end of the day, and understanding and making sure that people get what they need. So from a tech perspective, that priority is going to be delivering on time, on budget and scope. Whereas for business users, it's how am I going to do what I do today? Like, am I going to be able to do it as well? How is this going to impact my team? And obviously allowing and equipping each end user, wherever they are in the business, to be able to, be confident in the fact that they've got the answers to those questions, and they are ready for the change and ready to hit the ground running and embrace it, like Kathryn said, and use the new tool or whatever that looks like.
Do you find as though there's one aspect of change that is more common than others when it comes to creating challenges?
I think communication continues to be a constant challenge, because either over communication, so people then turn off, or under communication, or you think you're communicating in the right way and then someone says, I still don't know what's going on. So again, that's something that Abbie and I think have become quite adept at now, starting to see signals about okay, this group is starting to make this noise, which should indicate that the way in which we're communicating to them is not quite right, or it's about, and I think also it's interesting because now we've got a proliferation of channels, which is great in one respect. We can tell people lots of things in lots of different ways, but also can be challenging because what might be good for one person might not be good for another person. So we have to really, really focus on making sure that the communication is tailored to each team's, area, how they communicate. For example, you might be communicating to a team in a warehouse which don't have access to digital tools, and therefore you have to think about a different way of communicating, or people in a store who may be only working on a temporary basis and are constantly changing. So you have to think about how am I going to make sure that these people also know what's going on, so that they know how to use the new system, but they might only work every Sunday, and therefore how am I going to make sure that we get those communication out to them. So we spend a lot of time really focusing on thinking about who the audience is, what the right channel is, when's the right time to communicate, have we got the right messages, and just as I say, I think that is it is constant challenge to get it right, I think, and that's something which we continue to evolve.
I guess the hard part there. Oh, sorry, carry on.
I think also sometimes the communication around these changes can be incredibly complex, and so it's navigating that as well. Like there could be sensitive environments, like if, for example, the change is due to a merger or an acquisition, and there could be certain kind of regulations or compliance needs around those, but also as well, sometimes change is slightly painful. Sometimes it's short-term pain, but then long-term gain and future goals, and it's trying to navigate those in the right way. And obviously we can assist to do that as well. We've got experience, but also as well having that focus on your end users and their need, and hopefully helping to navigate those messages, and like Kathryn said, delivering at the right time to the right people.
Yeah, I guess like you say, it does get complicated when you look at the setup of a business and you've got people in different locations, often different countries. You've got people that work on shift work, and they might not have access to certain tools on certain days. And you, as a business, might be like, Joe, well, I communicated this message really well for the first 2 weeks, but actually you could have had 20% of your workforce on holidays. If it was over the summer, you could have had people on part shifts or whatever. And then if you don't continue that message after that 2-week period, then it's just going to get lost in translation, and there's going to be a handful of people that maybe don't even get educated at all. So yeah. I guess the other complex part from a Leantree point of view is every business is different in the way in which they communicate with their employees. So there's not a one size fits all approach. It's very much going into the organization and understanding everything as you just mentioned.
Exactly. And I think it's about the tailoring. I think it's also about the engagement. So it's all very well us communicating with people, but if they are not engaged with that message, and we have to think about how do we measure that engagement. But if they're not engaged, then it doesn't matter how many times you tell them, they'll turn around and say, I know nothing. I don't know about that change that you told me about 50 times last week, because I was not engaged. I was on my, this is also one of the challenges we face right now, is even not just communication, but also the training. You're training people who are also trying to do a day job at the same time, and there might be, messaging on Teams or actually doing some very valid work, but the problem is then they're not engaged. And so when it comes down to saying, okay, do you understand that message? Have you got it? Are you using the right, have you been trained? Have you know how to use the tools? We have to find different ways of measuring different levels of engagement to make sure that they fully understood. And that is partly, down to us to make sure that we're communicating in the right way, but also making sure that the client understands the fact that we need their teams to be engaged when they're having these sessions or when we're telling them messages. So
I was going to ask whose responsibility is this? I guess it's all of yours, right?
It is. It's all of ours. I mean, it's our responsibility to make sure we're providing the communications in a way that suits the specific client, and that's about making sure we spend the time with them to understand. To your point, each organisation is different, so we need to make sure that we're communicating through the usual channels and best way to communicate with different audiences. But also it's making sure the client understands the commitment that we need their engagement, so that when we are communicating, and if we're not communicating clearly enough, that someone tells us, because that's the other thing, is quite often, you can get into a situation where you think you're being very clear with comms, but if the client says, I didn't fully understand that. We need people to tell us that, to say it still doesn't make any sense to me, because to Abbie's point, some of these changes are very complex, and we'd rather know now that people don't understand, rather than getting towards the end and someone says, oh, still don't understand what this means to me. So.
I think one of the other things that we try to do is really integrate with the business. I think Kathryn mentioned it earlier, but working with the business and identifying kind of change agents within the organisation, or change champions that we work with in order to carry out some of this work. So it may not always be that somebody within a change stream of work is kind of putting together communications and is kind of cascading those, but actually working with people within the business, line managers or change champions, as I mentioned, to actually deliver that, because often it's much more successful if somebody that is familiar to the end users and the teams that are impacted, if it's somebody like that that's delivering the message to them, as opposed to somebody that they don't recognize or aren't familiar with. And obviously a large part of kind of being on board is building that trust, and often when you're using somebody that is familiar, then that often resonates much more clearly than it could do otherwise if it was somebody unknown. So I think working and partnering with the business teams to understand what's best, and obviously identifying the best kind of for all of those elements that Kathryn mentioned, so that hopefully we do strike the right note with the right people, and they are ready.
I can see why that would make a big impact, actually. I was going to ask, what level of pushback do you get internally? So when you're coming on as a third party, do you generally get pushback to be from the users, or are they generally sort of very open to change and what have you?
I think they're often very open to support. So they often see us as providing additional support, and sometimes it can be a bit of a relief for them, because it means that they've got someone else who can try and help them fully understand what these changes mean to them. But clearly, you know, sometimes it can be a bit challenging if someone externally is coming in who is sort of trying to understand what you're doing, and, you know, getting involved in activities that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. But that's why, to Abbie's point, you know, we really work very closely on building up the change champions. We build on, you know, really trying to embed and build trust within the organisation to make sure that they know that we're there to help them maximise the value that they can get from these tools. And that's something we spend a lot of what we do as part of the onboarding, is really trying to make sure we understand the business, the people involved, and really focus on that trust.
Nice. I like it. I think a lot of what you've just said brings me back to a podcast I did with Dom from Apply Digital. I'm not sure if you know him. I'd imagine you may have crossed paths at some point. But he gave the analogy, of a co-driver for a rally driver, saying the rally driver is the guy that kind of spearheads it all, but the co-driver is the person who basically enables it. Without the co-driver, the rally driver wouldn't be able to drive successfully. And he described it in a far better way than I just have done there, but it really made sense, and I really liked it. And often it's these basic analogies, when you hear them, it's like, oh, that makes sense, and it's really simple.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, often we're there to support the business. So if they need us to help support we get involved in lots of things which we wouldn't have initially intentionally potentially gone in to sort of help support, but we find a way. We are very adaptable, and I think very flexible, and we, you know, identify where we can add value. There's no point in us replicating something that someone else is doing. So if there is someone who is, you know, assigned to supporting the business a particular way, fine, we work alongside them to help them make them successful at what they do. And that's ultimately where, you know, we can add the value, because we want to make sure that we are adding value, not sort of hindering or slowing things down. So again, that's about us getting in early and understanding where we can maximize the opportunity for our support.
Yeah, I guess your success is pinned down to how easily the business adapts to that change, right?
Correct.
I guess,
and how quickly they start to get the value from it. So, you know, it's not just about, it's about making sure that the business are getting the value from very early after go live, not, you know, 3 months in where they're still trying to get people logged into the system and still trying to get people to actually change the way of working to maximize the value of the tooling. What we are there to do is to make sure that the business is ready and prepared for go live, but also that they're then maximising the value of the new tool from day one.
You'd hope 3 months in they've learned how to log into the system, right?
We've all seen it. I've seen it before where technology are like, brilliant, go live, tick, we've done it, everyone's there, and then we still can't actually get anyone logged in because the permissions haven't been set up correctly, or no one knows how they can log a ticket, but they don't actually know how, it doesn't go anywhere, it just sits in the queue and no one knows the next step. So, we've all I think had experiences of that, and that's the bit that it's not, none of this stuff is easy. It requires us really to understand the impact of the change, which is where we get involved. Again, that's why we want to be in early, so we can understand, exactly what does that change mean, both from a people, process, technology perspective, so that setting them up for the quickest, fastest success. And that is asking questions that maybe people haven't thought to ask, or helping the business think about different ways of doing things, which again can be challenging, but often that's where you're going to see the most value. There's no point in taking a process that you're doing today that's for a manual process that you're then going to try and automate. If you're looking at it exactly in the same way, you need to take a step back and think, okay, right, what are we actually trying to achieve here, and how do we use these tools, the best of the tool to deliver that success, so or to reach that goal.
Yeah, I guess you also have a lot of companies that want to take something with them for the sake of taking it with them, not because they necessarily need it or they use it, but they're used to it. And it's like, okay, well, why are you doing that? We don't need that. If you use this tool efficiently and properly, then actually you can remove that from your setup completely, as you can do with that and that.
Yeah. And Abbie and I were talking about this just today, about how do you get people to, almost forget how they are doing things, and to really come at things from a very, fresh perspective, to think, right, okay, what is it? And, how do we focus on where we're trying to get to, not how we're doing it today, but what the ultimate outcome is. And then because all these tools are super powerful these days, they've got amazing capabilities. And it's about, we try to help the businesses try and lose some of that sort of restraint that they currently got because of doing things, and think about it slightly differently. And that can be through, workshops, user groups, taking things back to the beginning, doing process mapping, looking at the as is, thinking about then how do we, where do we want to get to from a 2B perspective, and helping them think about that journey.
Okay. We also see it on the flip side, right, as well, Kathryn, in terms of technology. I'll say we're undergoing this change. The business do X today and they're going to do X tomorrow, but actually the detail that's missing. So yes, you're going to be able to you do this today and you're going to do this tomorrow, but exactly how many steps does it take for you to get from start to end today, and how many steps is it going to take in the future? And often it's the devil is in that detail, that quite often it's not just as simple as saying they do this and they're going to do this going forward, but actually if it takes them 10 times longer, then is that really fit for purpose? And I think often until we support, a lot of business don't maintain process maps, so aren't kind of fully clear on exactly how they do it today or how many people are involved, etc. But once we start to get into some of that detail and start to map out how it looks going forward, that's when some of these kind of flags are realized. And then obviously we work to support that. So is it we need to review how it's going to work? Is it that we just need to make sure that people are equipped with training, etc.? Or is there a resource consideration there that the business needs to think about? So some of those things can kind of come to light through those processes as well.
Okay. I know obviously every change process is going to be different, and it's going to be reflective of the companies involved in it, whether it be an acquisition or whether it be a technology change or what have you. But something that I find is, or something that I feel, sorry, is really important, is bringing in specialists to help with that change, whether that be a third party like you guys, whether that be technical specialists on a new piece of software that they're integrating, or whatever it might be. But again, it's something that I hear is overlooked quite regularly as well, usually due to costs. Well, what's your thoughts on hiring technical specialists to help with the change process and the upskilling process?
I think that there is a place for specialists in particular environments where, if it helps with the speed of adoption. If you've got a specialist who knows the tool inside out, they can help with delivery much more quickly than if you don't have someone. And I think it depends on what the goals of the project are, whether or not that is core to requirement. I mean, for example, we feel that what we offer is really important because it helps the business achieve their goals quicker. And that's why we would advocate for having sort of our specialist type activities. I'm sure there are other elements of deliverables where there are other technical skills which would have the same impact if they were brought in from a, I don't know, development perspective, someone who's had experience of working with the tool before and can speed up the development elements of it. So I think there are times and places, I think, for sort of all types of specialist skills, depending on the scale and the type of the project. If a business doesn't have experience or something, then clearly they could spend the time in getting to upskill and know it, but that then will be time lost in terms of speed of realizing the benefits.
I think it also depends on the way you work. So definitely what we strive to do within Leantree is really embed within the teams and bring them on, bring users on the journey throughout, so that any kind of knowledge that we kind of create over the time that we are engaged on a program, that we are kind of working hand in hand with the end business users. So it's not a case where we've accumulated all this knowledge and then potentially you're in a situation where you've brought in specialists and they step away with that knowledge. We do a lot to avoid that situation. So making sure that there's comprehensive handovers, there's knowledge transfers throughout, and like I said, bringing people on that journey throughout so that you aren't in that situation. I think that's one of the most important things that needs to be considered if you do go down the route of bringing in external experts, to make sure that you're not in that situation. And if it's done well, it can, like Kathryn said, it boosts the bits that you need it to and supports you in the way that you need it to without compromising on that kind of situation that I just described.
Yeah, well, I mean that's super important, is to make sure that knowledge stays within the business. And I guess I'm kind of looking at it from like the Leantree as an example, or another business change consultancy would come in and they would oversee it, ensure it's smooth and make sure the handover is done correctly, etc. But those specialists would come in underneath just to help with upskilling in certain areas. Often you find that companies go from technology that's maybe 20-30 years old to something that's all shiny and modern, and it's very different. So just putting the team from there to there will take a long time to upskill. So bringing in certain people to help with that would be very, in my opinion, is very, I can't talk. In my opinion, it's very beneficial.
Yeah.
We got there in the end. Okay. So what other activities do you get involved in?
I think one of the biggest ones that definitely has been kind of front and center from some of the recent engagements that we had is training. What we find most often is that it misses the end user's needs. So often it's not considered from the view of the end business user. Quite often when you're implementing change, especially with digital transformation, you might have like a new tooling provider that says, yeah, we offer training, that's all good. But the questions that quite often you need to consider are, what type of training? What does that look like? Is it personalized? Is it going to build in and integrate like the organization's ways of working and processes? And ultimately, is it going to enable business users to hit the ground on day one and be ready and know what they need to do and run with it and do what they do today? Quite often, if organizations go down the road of using like third-party training, you'll have business users that attend and ask kind of organization-specific questions around the tooling, often related to process. And often the third parties aren't equipped and don't know how to answer those questions. They can answer about the tooling capabilities, but they perhaps aren't enriched with that knowledge from an organization perspective. And in that situation, you're essentially then having your business users come away lacking confidence in the new tool because they haven't had their concerns kind of answered, or they're not familiar or haven't been reassured on exactly how that's going to work for them in future. So that's something that definitely needs to be considered, and it's something that we've supported with more recently, more comprehensive kind of training approach for end business users to make sure that really, like I said, they're ready to hit the ground on that first day. They know exactly how they're going to work, and obviously they're able to more quickly realize that success with a new tool.
No, I guess that's something as well that you would have to consider the different channels in which you deliver that training through, whether it be
100%.
in person, whether it be on Slack or Teams or whatever, maybe even on an internal intranet with a document that they can all access.
We think about things like quick reference guides, videos now. We've done some podcasts where we've talked about like specific elements of training where we think they need to know. We've had to break it down into bite-sized chunks because some people might only have a minute or two, or they just want to know why about one very specific part of a process that we need to make sure that everyone knows about. So we have to be very, think about the audience, the channels, what they need to know, and also what they need to know from an onboarding perspective. So going forward, if new people join the team, what do they need to know versus what they're going to need to know to do the job day to day versus future when we're not there to support, making sure they've got all those materials in a centralized place, which is then easy to use. And sometimes that means integrating with the organization's learning tools. It could be sitting it on some sort of portal or intranet, or that comes to the point about making sure that we're leaving the business with everything that they need to be successful going forward once we've left.
Which is the definition of a successful business change transformation, I guess, right?
Exactly. I think that's part of it, yeah. And I think, after other activities after training, we then will help support UAT. So we'll make sure that the right people are involved in the UAT activity, they know what they need to do, make sure they're trained in order to be able to use the tools to do the UAT. And then we also get involved in, hypercare, so helping to manage feedback during the hypercare period. So once we do go live, making sure that the feedback is getting from the business, the relevant teams, and the tech teams are getting the feedback back to the business and helping to prioritize, focus on particular issues, and just helping with the general communication around that as well, which is really important.
Yeah. Okay. Do you find as though, or do you see many instances where you've been involved in this transformation program, you've visited the training, and you're in the process of kind of offboarding, and then suddenly you have to get called back in, and you've got almost like a P1 because for whatever reason it's not gone to plan, and you're having to go through a lot of what you've done again?
There's elements of that, yeah. Sorry, Abbie.
No, I was going to say, I think often we're asking those questions before we come to that point. So as part of training, everybody's received the training, we've had the feedback, we know it's embedded. And then often when the program is gearing up to roll out, then often because we've built the relationships around the business, we know the business teams that are going to be impacted. We would at that point be asking questions to make sure that it has been considered. So thankfully, touch wood, it's never been a situation where we're rolled off and then actually something goes wrong and it hasn't been considered. I think at that point, if it hasn't, then asking those questions can mean that either we end up supporting, or the business will make sure that there are kind of provisions put in place so that it has been considered, so that you're not in that situation where it ultimately falls over. I mean, it can be like really fundamental things. Like quite often these transformations have complex cutover plans for the day of go live, and then actually you look at the business activity that's around that, and there's often not a lot of consideration, and you can see why. Obviously there's lots of time pressures, that these changes, technical changes, are really complex. So making sure that you've got that focus around, okay, what else needs to be done around the go live to make sure it's successful? Is everybody logged in? To Kathryn's point earlier, can everybody access the tool? Has the resource been flexed to accommodate the go live? Like if there's going to be an influx of orders, if you're changing your order management system, have you got people that can deal with that? If your end customer is going to be impacted, have you thought about any communications or terms and conditions that needed to be updated with that? So I think asking those questions early and making sure there's a plan in place, whether we're supporting it or not, can help avoid that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that you have these conversations regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that stuff, I guess I would just assume that people would take into consideration, but yeah, you know what they say about assuming things, and it's clear that they probably don't.
No, I think we also do things like we do readiness surveys throughout the program to understand where people's level of readiness are, and that can also be quite telling. So if you think you've got someone who think they should be ready, and yet they answer the readiness survey saying I'm not ready for this, then you know immediately maybe there is something that we need to do to try and make sure we get them in a position where they're ready to support as well, and that can also help reduce the number of issues that you get post go live of people saying it's a bug, and it's not a bug, it's just a change in the way of working, changing something. So
I think also to your point, James, like quite often, that assumption is common, and you mentioned at the top that you're hearing a lot of the frustration or things that commonly can go wrong when you're rolling out digital transformations. And I think quite often tech are so focused on the technical delivery that often they would assume that perhaps the end business users know as part of the rollout that resource needs to be considered, or that they need to make sure everybody's logged in. And it's definitely not that that awareness isn't there, but I think that there's an assumption between teams perhaps that is taken care of, and actually that's often where it can fall over, or perhaps is forgotten about because there's so much focus going on from tech, from the program side, and making sure that's getting over the line. Business obviously also have a day job to do, so that is often their focus. So it's about making sure that communication between the program and the end business users is fluid and it's smooth, and that there's no miscommunication, so that those situations are avoided.
No, again, I guess that stems back down to communication, right? Just as one of the possibly the number one thing to work on across the business to ensure a successful transformation, to make sure everyone's aligned, everyone's talking, everyone knows what everyone's doing, and everyone's on the same page. Easier said than done, though, clearly. Brilliant. All right. Well, I think that probably brings an end to the conversation. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having us.
No worries at all. As I said at the start, I mean, for me, business change is a hot topic. Unfortunately, I hear about this a lot, and it's more often than not it's with a negative impact. So if you're listening to this right now, hopefully you've taken some insights as to just why business change is so important and where you should be investing your time and your money and your resources. But most importantly, let's draft these guys in at the start of the conversations, because it's clear there's a lot more value that can be had when you're thinking about business change at the start than midway or towards the end of the project, when you've already gone through the majority of it and there's a limited impact that they can have. But look, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I know I have. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.